Many visitors see a lot in London, but still leave feeling like they don't quite understand it. Today's episode explores how storytelling and walking the city can bring London's past to life.
Welcome to the UK Travel Planning Podcast. Your host is the founder of the UK Travel Planning website, Tracy Collins. Each week, Tracy shares destination guides, travel tips and itinerary ideas, as well as interviews with a variety of guests who share their knowledge and experience of UK travel to help you plan your perfect UK vacation. Join us as we explore the UK from cosmopolitan cities to quaint villages, from historic castles to beautiful islands, and from the picturesque countryside to seaside towns.
Before we get started, we'd like to thank our sponsor, Walks and Devour Tours. If you're planning a trip to London, you'll already know the challenge. There's a lot you want to do and only a limited amount of time to fit it all in. That's where the right tour makes all the difference, because you want experiences that are the best use of your time, with more access, less waiting and a deeper sense of the city. That's why we recommend Walks and Devour Tours. They offer walking tours and food tours designed to make your time count, often with early or after hours entry. You'll also be with exceptional local guides who add the stories and context, so you leave with a richer understanding of what you're seeing and a trip that feels genuinely memorable. If you're visiting London as a couple, with family, or you simply prefer a more intimate experience, Walks and Devour Tours also offer private tour options. To learn more, you'll find the link in the show notes. Now let's get into this week's episode. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's edition of the UK Travel Planning Podcast. Now, this week I'm very, very excited because I have a new partner to announce and to introduce. I've actually just had to kick Doug out of the room because he was he was having a fantastic chat with our guest today, because he has met Robin and he has been on one of Robin's tours. So actually, I was saying, Robin, Doug should have been doing the interview with you, because you two were chatting away for ages there, right, yeah. Which is lovely. It's fantastic. He absolutely loved the tour when he was in London last year. So we are very pleased to have you on board. So before we get into the nitty gritty of the podcast, just introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about what it is that you do and a little bit about your company. I'm going to let you introduce the name of your company. You can do the unveiling. And tell us a little bit about your background and how you ended up doing what you do.
Well, Tracy, thank you very much. It's a real pleasure, honestly, to be on this podcast, and I know we've been in communication a bit, and it was lovely to see Doug in London. So then a little bit about me. My name is Robin Launder, and my company is called Fantastic Walks. I really should have had a trumpet playing or something in the background when I did that, but Fantastic Walks. And it's my company, essentially. So it's just me. Sort of. I'll explain a little bit about that a little bit later on, perhaps because my son might be joining me. He's a very good tour guide. So essentially, it's just me. So I am a 60-year-old bloke who thought, what would be a really good thing to do now that I am coming slightly towards the end of my previous career, not quite, but a little bit, which was in education. So for the last, I don't know, time seems to move on. I've been a teacher for 30 years or so, right? Don't quote me on those, not least because I don't want to think about those 30 years, like where did they go, do you know? But anyway, for the last 30 years or so, I've been a teacher. And then towards the end of that, I started getting into teacher training. So I go around to schools, I go into conferences, I talk to lots of people about behavior management, about how kids learn, about motivation, all of those really interesting things that teachers need to know about. And I kind of really enjoy that. And I still do that. So I kind of manage my diary and I still do those pieces of work. But essentially, my wife said to me, Robin, you have to get out of the house more. I do need a little bit of my own time. And I thought, okay, what can I do? What do I like? Well, my subjects that I would teach, English and history. That were my two subjects. My degree is in history. When you go into schools, though, they have quite a lot of history teachers, so they often will put you into teaching English. And English is one of my other loves. So English and history. And I thought, well, I like walking, I like talking, I like teaching. You know, I like trying to be funny. My children think I'm funny. My wife thinks I'm less funny. And, you know, that's just the reality of it, I think. And go out there and do walking tours. So that's what I've been doing for about a year. But I have to say it's going, really, really well, partly because I think I absolutely love doing it.
I have to say, Robin, and we chatted about this before, that you're like the male equivalent of me, because that is exactly my background. Not that I'm funny in any way, shape, or
I don't know
form.
about that.
But I also was a teacher, history teacher, not English. I'm not so much of a fan of English, but I was a history teacher. And then I became an advisor. And my actual remit was to prevent children from being permanently excluded from schools, which I absolutely love. So I did that job for 25 years and loved it. But I got to the end of that kind of teaching career and I was thinking, what should I do? I really like history. I really like talking. So here we are. I'm the podcast host and you're being interviewed.
I mean, it really is almost identical. Our journeys are almost identical. It's crazy. Yeah.
It's just fantastic. It really is fabulous. So how do you think that combination of your teaching background, your love of history, your love of English, your comedic side of you, how does that combine and influence the way that you are as a guide?
I think entirely. I think I think essentially the person that I am on the tours is essentially the person I am in the classroom, which is essentially the person I am when I'm standing up in front of maybe 30 primary school teachers or 500 people in a conference. I mean, it's the same person really, and I think it's the same kind of core skills. So I think it's about, communication, that you get your message across, whatever your message is, whether it's how to use an apostrophe or what happened at this building, at this corner of a road in London. I mean, what you're talking about is different, but it's the same kind of underlining skills. Humour is always a good thing. This kind of a sort of trickling of humour all the way through, whether it's a lesson or a conference or a walk. People then are going, okay, I wonder what's the next funny thing he's going to say, So they're kind of paying attention in that way. And I think the other key thing, this is my own personal view. So the best teachers, the best teacher trainers, the best guides, this is my view, are the ones that are passionate about it. So if you're passionate about that thing that you are talking about, that's a sort of permission giver for everyone else to be passionate about it. But it shows that you just love this thing, that this thing is like the best thing in the world. And, I'm passionate about what I teach, whatever the format, whether it's a walking tour in London or, I don't know, Shakespeare's sonnet. It really doesn't matter. It's the same sort of thing. It's about being passionate about that thing. And I love those things. And I think it comes across. And I think that's infectious.
I absolutely 100% agree with you, Robin. It really does. And I just even think of my own days back in the classroom about, and we've all had history teachers who were a bit boring and a bit dry and they relied on a textbook and it was, death by worksheet in some ways. And I wanted to do drama. I wanted to do art. I wanted to and that's how the kids learned in my classroom. Yeah. And I absolutely loved it. And I think if you have that passion and however you deliver it, that comes across and it's infectious. Everybody is infected by that and goes along with that enthusiasm as well and kind of wants to learn. And that's actually the best way to learn when you're kind of immersed in it with somebody else who's got that enthusiasm as well as, of course, the knowledge. Now you mentioned that you started Fantastic Walks just over a year ago, so it's not been going very long. But you have got, I believe it's over 400 5-star TripAdvisor reviews.
Absolutely.
That's amazing.
Well, thank you very much. It's huge, it's bonkers and it's nuts. And I should add on to that too. So it's about 450 now. I think last time we talked, it was, just over, but of course they keep on going up. But the other thing to add into that is they are only 5-star reviews. There is nothing less than 500 5-star reviews. So it's about 450 5-star reviews and nothing less than that. And I'm just overwhelmed by that. Of course I am. And of course I'm very proud about that too, because, I know that is something special. And I want it to be what it is, which is a reflection of what I do. I want people to come onto the walks and to learn stuff, to have stories, to bring the history alive in the way that you were just describing, right? But also to have fun, to go, this is my job, this is what I think, right? This is my belief, this is my world view. It's not just about not just about, being a tour guide, but it's my worldview. My worldview is that when you go into a restaurant, that restaurant should be trying to make you the best meal you can ever have. Do you know? That when you go and see a film at the cinema, the person and the people that made that film should be doing their best to make the best film they can possibly make. When you come into my classroom, when I was teaching as a teacher within the classroom, I want it to be the best lesson I can do. I want to be the best teacher I can be for you. And that translates and transfers to coming onto my walk. I want my walks to be the best walk. I want you, when you come onto my walk, to go, oh my God, that was just absolutely brilliant. I've just had the best time. How lucky are we? That's my job, to provide that, do you know? And that's what I want to do. It's not about money. It's not about any of that stuff. It's just about a quality product, something that people really enjoy,
And clearly that is what people are responding to. I mean, that's why you're getting these amazing, a number of five-star reviews. Was there a moment for you when after you started doing the tours, that you kind of went, wow, this is really working for me and for everybody? It's all kind of gelling.
Yeah, it was day one. Actually, I can tell you day one. So the way that I just did this, it was, I had to put my toe in the water, So the way that I did, I went onto a tour. I went onto a walking tour of London with a really nice guy, and I kind of emailed him afterwards, and we got talking. And I said, I'd quite like to do this. He said, well, would you like to take a group? Would you like to take one of our groups, right? So I researched the walk. I really looked into it. I sort of did lots of dummy runs on my own. My wife came along. My kids came along. We sort of went through it because you've got to know the material. You've got to be sure of what you're doing. And then I took my first group, and I had the best time. By the way, I believe they had the best time because they told me that they had the best time. And then I thought I would just risk something at the end, right? Whether I should have done this or not, I don't know. But I said, look, just so you know, this group, the people that are with me now today, will always be firmly fixed in my brain. I will never forget you. And it's true. I haven't. In fact, for my website, I have a sort of an image of this group that's on the website. Because this group is my first ever group. And what I said to them, I said, so you're always going to be firmly in my brain. And the reason for that is you are the first group I've ever had. I don't know whether I should have said it or not, but I did, right? I thought I'd just take the risk. And they went, no, you've been doing this for 20 years. I go, no, honestly, no, the first time. No, we don't believe you. Honestly, it's true. It's true. This is the first time I did it. And I guess it was from their reaction and also their reaction all the way through, really, that kind of convinced me that I'm onto something, whatever that thing is, whatever that ingredient is. It's probably the stuff that we've talked about, knowing your subject, being passionate, being funny, engaging, being personable, being a nice human being. Being inclusive.
I think so. And I think, well, just your enthusiasm, honestly, Robin, it's coming through in I don't know how to explain it. Just bountiful enthusiasm coming through the mic here. I can feel it. And it's getting on. It getting a little bit later here in Australia, but you're enthusing me this time of night. I'm like, oh my goodness, it's amazing. Now, it takes me a little bit to when I was back in the classroom because I was very enthusiastic about teaching my kids. And one of the best ways that we can teach or we learn, I think, is through stories, and particularly history. It just lends itself so well to storytelling. We can all learn a list of dates and it means nothing. It's as dry and as boring as you can get. But actually telling somebody a story makes such a difference. And why do you think it is? Why do you think when you tell a story, it draws people in?
Yeah, I think this is set down when we were like living in caves and we were around those fires, and we would sit around and people would tell stories. I think having a walking tour guide of London is a modern version of sitting around a fire in a cave, of how many hundreds of thousands of years ago. I don't know, but I think it's the same core ingredients. We love stories, and and you were saying about history. It's funny. You would assume that the subject in schools that's best for stories would be English, because English is always about stories, but it's not. The subject that's best for stories easily, hands down, is history. In fact, if you think about the word history, it's got the word story embedded within it, right? So it's definitely history. So I think we love stories. I think we are storytellers. I think we lose ourselves in the story. I think it's one of the reasons that TV and cinema and podcasts and reading, thankfully, reading is so is so important to people and it enriches their lives. So I think we just have a natural predisposition to the importance of the story. And what's lovely about doing a walking tour is you're doing the story where the thing happened. Wow. You're talking about, say, Churchill, and you're talking about Churchill and the speech that he made outside the building, and you can go and you can touch that building and you can bring it to life, or whatever the story might be. There's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of glorious stories in London. That's true of every city, but it's particularly true of London. And to stand there and to say that story, to bring that story to life, I don't know, this is what you do. I know it's what you do, but almost to act it out. So, for instance, on one occasion, I think during my Changing the Guard tour, we look at Horse Guards Parade. It was a famous jousting arena. It was Henry VIII's jousting arena. So I get if there's children, I get them to hold my flag, which is now the lance, and they have to kind of charge me in a very safe kind of way. And I fall off my imaginary horse and I explain what jousting is in that way, and then linking it to what happened to Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn. You'll have to go onto the walk, of course, if you want to find out all those details. But it's all about stories and bringing it alive, Yeah.
And also, getting the kids involved as well, acting it out is another great way to experience it and immerse yourself in it and learn it. It's just
and not forget it. Yeah.
Sorry?
And then not forget it. Because
not forget it. Yeah, absolutely. That's the best way to do it. And I've always firmly believed that. And as you say, London is it is an open book full of stories waiting to be told.
Yeah.
And go on your tour and you can hear some of those stories, which is amazing. Now, for somebody who hasn't done a walk and tour before, so if you're listening and you're thinking, I fancy doing this walk and tour, Robin, but I'm not sure about this. What's going to be involved in it? What do you think surprises them most about going on a walk and tour? Just a quick pause to thank our sponsor, Walks and Devour Tours. If you're planning a trip to London, you'll already know the challenge. There's a lot you want to do and only a limited amount of time to fit it all in. That's where the right tour makes all the difference, because you want experiences that are the best use of your time, with more access, less waiting, and a deeper sense of the city. That's why we recommend Walks and Devour Tours. They offer walking tours and food tours designed to make your time count, often with early or after hours entry. You'll also be with exceptional local guides who add the stories and context, so you leave with a richer understanding of what you're seeing and a trip that feels genuinely memorable. If you're visiting London as a couple, with family, or you simply prefer a more intimate experience, Walks and Devour Tours also offer private tour options. To learn more, you'll find the link in the show notes.
Gosh, that's a really good question. I think how engaging it is. I think that's the main thing. You can do this in lots of ways. Like, you can go onto a bus tour, a taxi tour, or you can get a guided book. They've all got something for them. They're all good ways of engaging with London. I think the walking tour is the best because you get up close and personal. You're there where this stuff happened. So what surprises people? I think what surprises people is, I was looking forward to this. I thought this would be really good. I mean, honestly, I thought it was going to be good, but I didn't know it was going to be that good. I didn't know that story was there. Oh my goodness, I've walked past, and I obviously do this for Londoners too, so you kind of get a slightly different, response from Londoners. They say, I've lived here 40 years, 50 years, 60 years, whatever it might be. I never knew that. What, there? That happened there? I can't believe that. How did I not know? So I think it's the kind of the immediacy of being in the place that brings it to life. That's what makes it extra, extra special, do you know?
Oh,
Yeah,
absolutely. And there's so many places, as I say, you can walk to in London, and you're
yeah,
walking in the footsteps of famous
yeah,
people, or, authors that you may have read about,
absolutely.
or you're sitting in a pub having a pint, where
Yeah,
Charles Dickens has sat and
yes,
had a
yes,
pint at some
absolutely.
point. It's
Crazy. Yeah,
crazy and it's incredible. And London has had a very tumultuous, very interesting
yes,
history.
yeah,
Lots of things have gone on right the way we've got, you can see
mm,
Roman remains
yeah,
in
absolutely.
London, all the way to present day. Lots of stuff's gone on in London. Now, how do you kind of balance the humour and the
Yeah,
entertainment with, I guess, some of the kind of emotional parts of London's
yes,
past? Because, there's been
yeah.
some interesting things disasters that have happened in London.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly. Exactly. So, I mean, obviously, the humor's got to be appropriate to the context, right? So, I do a Jack the Ripper tour. Look, I can tell you, there's no humor in that, right? Because it's very difficult to be, and nor would I ever want to be, to put in jokes or be funny in the context of that. That's just far too disrespectful. That would not be appropriate. So it's about the context, in a sense, makes the decisions about humor, say. But you know what? I think humor is one part of something. So I think what you're trying to do as a storyteller is evoke emotions in the people that are listening, right? I think the best tour guides, and most tour guides are pretty good, in all honesty, because if you're not very good, they generally speaking, you get poor reviews and then people don't re-employ you. But anyway, right? I think the very best ones are the ones that elicit emotions from their group, and humor is one of those emotions, right? So it's on that kind of umbrella term, but also sadness, also shock, also potentially disgust. They're all emotional reactions to the story that you're hearing, which means that you are fully engaged in that story. So I think for me, it's about the emotion that I want to bring to the fore. Sometimes it's, funny emotion. Sometimes it's a sad emotion. Obviously, it depends on the context of what you're talking about. But that's what you're trying to get into. And I think that's my
Perfect.
stories are too good for that, actually.
Absolutely, absolutely. Because you just say you can evoke a range of emotions in a story. Now, you have got quite a few different tours for people to choose between.
Yes.
So, do you want to give us a little bit of a description or rundown of what you have got on offer?
Yeah.
Because I'm very
Yeah.
excited because I'm going to be joining some of these as well. So,
Yeah.
I'm like, oh yes, I'll go on that one.
Of course, Doug joined my Changing the Guard tour, which is like Monday, Wednesday, Fridays. A version of it is on Sunday. That's just a lot of fun, and it's so interesting. And it's you may be a monarchist, you may not be a monarchist. It doesn't matter. This is just a very special thing to see because you're seeing living history. And that's what I love about it. It's living history, and it's exciting. We march with the guards. Down the Mall. We march with them, where the band is playing to our right, and we're kind of marching too. We have lots of fun. So Changing the Guard is a very, very special one, and it's one of my favourites. I'm just thinking about what I did yesterday. In the afternoon, I did a Soho Rock and Roll tour. Boy, do I love the Soho Rock and Roll tour.
I'm on that one, Robin. I'm on that
Please
one.
do. Oh my goodness, right? I'm not saying it's any better than the Changing the Guards. It's kind of fundamentally different, but what a tour. So, to give you an example, we look at where the Beatles did their last rooftop concert, 30th of January 1969. We look at this is just a tiny few things that we do, but I mean the whole thing is incredible. We look at where the Rolling Stones auditioned. We go to where Amy Winehouse wrote the lyrics for Back to Black. We go to where the Beatles recorded Hey Jude. Hey Jude, the most successful Beatles song of all time. We go to the place where Led Zeppelin first played as Led Zeppelin. Do you know? We go to where Bowie did his first 5 albums, where he got the album cover made for Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders and Mars. You can probably tell that this particular tour appeals to people of a certain age.
Yeah. And what is that saying about me?
No. Gosh, I would never say that. But it's certainly my age and my age group and up, But interestingly, also younger people do go on it because, what happens is the grandparents and the parents introduce this music, this glorious, wonderful rock and roll music to their children, and they go, oh my goodness, this is really, really great. But it also has modern stuff in it, like we see where Oasis did their first album cover, where Pulp and Blur played. I mean, it's a really, really good tour. So I love that. That's tour number 2. Tour number 3, I do Westminster Wonders. That's fantastic. We start at Buckingham Palace. We go through all the back streets of St. James, through St. James's Park, through Horse Guards Parade, down Whitehall. We end up at Westminster Abbey. We're seeing 3 UNESCO World Heritage Sites. I mean, it's just remarkable. Again, dripping in history. Wonderful, wonderful stories. I've just told you, or at least I made reference to the Ripper tour that I've just put together, which I have to say, I think it's just fabulous. I know how can you say that without sounding conceited? But I do think it is. I didn't mention this, and I should have mentioned this when you were saying, about my journey here. So for the last 30 years, I have been a teacher. And I still teach in the context I told you about. Now I do the walking tours. But before I was a teacher, for about 17 years, I worked in the prison service. So I have a master's in forensic psychology, which includes criminology. So for the Ripper tour, we're looking at history, we're looking at the offences, but we're also looking at it from the perspective, from the lens, if you like, of a criminologist. Mm-hmm. And the reality is, I worked. When I was working in the prison service, I only ever worked with serious offenders. So I worked with offenders that would be aligned to and would be as awful as the offences that happened in Whitechapel in 1888 by Jack the Ripper. So that gives a different dimension to it. What else do I do? Oh, Hidden London. It's a new tour. Oh, I love this. I mentioned it to you, I think. So Hidden London, the thing is, what's hidden? So when you're walking down these streets, we start off in Trafalgar Square, we go over across the Strand, we go down to Victoria Embankment, we come back up again through Covent Garden. It is the most wonderful loop. I mean, it is glorious, and it is full of hidden treasures. And here's the thing, right? This is why I think I think it's true anyway of any city that you visit. Any city that you'll visit, if you're there on holiday, and I always do this personally. So if I go to a city with my wife, we always do this. I always do 1 or more walking tours because it brings the place alive.
Yes,
right?
absolutely.
It brings it alive. I love it. I also, it's a bit busman's holiday because I want to see how they're doing it too, So, I often learn because they do some great things that I then incorporate in. But anyway, so you want to come to London, you want to do a walking tour because otherwise you're walking down these streets and you go, well, that's a nice building. And that's it. You need something. You need someone to bring that alive. It's the stories that relate to that building, And Hidden London, there's so much stuff you don't see. And when you've got someone pointing out, that's that, old stuff, new stuff in the middle, it's a joyous experience. It's a joyous experience.
Well, I'm excited about all your tours, Robin, but I'm also very excited about that one because I'm particularly interested in the area of Covent Garden because the history of Covent Garden is fascinating, and most visitors will come see some street entertainers, go and have a cup of coffee, an afternoon tea or something, and have no idea of the history of Covent Garden. So I'm not going to share that in this episode. I am going to do an episode later on this year about Covent Garden itself. But go on Robin's tour and find out about the history of Covent Garden because it is absolutely fascinating. Now, when you talked a little bit about, obviously, when we go on holiday as well, we always do a food tour because we love our food, and we also do a walking tour because again, you learn about you can walk. There's so many places in so many cities around the world. You walk past something and you will not understand or realize the kind of significance or what happened in that building, and it's lovely to kind of get that context. Now there are so many stories to choose from in London. How do you decide what to include in a tour? Because you could probably spend months taking somebody around Covent Garden, for example.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, exactly. So to give an example of that, so when I start off the Soho walking tour, which is the rock and roll tour, I say, it's lovely that you're here, etc., etc. And just so you know, because it's a 2-hour tour, by the way, the tour is a 2-hour tour. Virtually all are about 2 hours. And I say to my guests, just so you know, this is a 4-hour walking tour that I've crammed into 2 hours, right? And the point is, it could have also been an 8-hour walking tour that I crammed into 4, because that's the point. There's so much choice. I think some of it sometimes is just geographical, because you want to start in a place that's really easy for guests to get to, somewhere near a tube station, for instance, or a really obvious place, and you want to end at a place that's really easy to get away from. There's a tube station, for instance. So that sometimes it's just the geography that tells you, and therefore, because of the geography, you pick up on the stories as you go around. So sometimes it's just nothing more than that. Sometimes it's thematic. So, for instance, when I do the Westminster tour, that is the Wonders of Westminster, where we start from Buckingham Palace and we go down to Westminster Abbey, well, that actually crosses over some of the Changing of the Guard. But the Changing of the Guard material is very different from the Westminster Wonders material, because the Changing of the Guard material is linked to essentially Changing of the Guard. Whereas Westminster Wonders, you've got a much more of a free hand to talk about anything that personally interests me. Hidden London, the one I just mentioned, the one that you want to go on, and one I want you to go on, where we start in Trafalgar Square, we go down to the Embankment, we come across the Strand, we go through Covent Garden and come back to Trafalgar Square. So this is quite nice. It's a circular one. Well, it's Hidden London. So there the theme has to be everything that is hidden. Hidden purposefully so, perhaps. We go into St. Martin's in the Fields, and we go into the crypt. And in the crypt, there is a whipping post. It's a sort of medieval punishment. Hardly anyone knows it's there. You've got to know where to look to be able to go and see it. The date on it is 1752. There is a whipping post in the crypt dated 1752. I won't go through the horrible details about what a whipping post entails, but there's a clue in the title, of course, right? And it's 1752. That's where its date is on there. And that's a replacement from an older one that goes all the way back to the 1500s. So we go into a crypt. What does the word crypt mean? It means hidden. That is the literal definition of the word crypt. That's why you get it in cryptology and encryption and cryptic crosswords. It's all hidden. So it starts by going into a hidden place, literally, St. Martin's in the Fields, and then working our way around. So as long as the connection is hidden in some kind of way, hidden intentionally, hidden because we've forgotten about it, hidden because it was lost in some way, then that will be the sort of thematic link, But even then, there's tons of stuff that you could talk about. So you've got to be selective. Yeah.
Well, I have to say, I love the cafe in the crypt to go and have something to eat, because it's amazing. Exactly. And I'll recommend that all the time. Well, I never knew about that. So there you go. So, I'm learning already from you before we've even done a walk into Robin. So I'm sure everybody listening, I'm sure, is catching that enthusiasm that you're exuding in this interview, which is amazing. And as I say, like Doug, absolutely loved the tour that he did with you, and has talked about it ever since. That's why he had to pop in and say hello when he knew I was talking to you tonight. And I'm really looking forward to coming on a tour. And so I kind of want to ask, because we're very selective about who we work with. We really, and when I first spoke to you and Doug went on a tour, you absolutely fit so well into who we want to work with and who we want to promote, because there's so many different tours in London that everybody can choose from, and lots of different walking tours. But what do you feel, because you've had so much amazing feedback, what is it that people take away from a walk with you that wants, makes them want to leave that amazing feedback for you, do you think?
Oh, thank you. Oh, that's a kind thing. And I do think it is a little bit like what you just said, actually, that they've had such a great time. I mean, okay, that's your hope. That's my intent. I told you that's my worldview. I want people to come onto a tour and have the best time ever. That's my job, to provide that. That's what I believe, right? And I think then people have had such a nice time. They've enjoyed themselves, right? And to the point that they are surprised how much they've enjoyed themselves. Surprised how, they say, "Well, I knew it was going to be good. I just didn't know it was going to be that good." And it's charming. I just love reading the feedback. But I think the feedback is a gift back. I think what they're saying is, "I love this so much. I want you to know it is. So I'm going to go to the trouble of writing the 5-star review and say what I say, because I want you to know, Robin, that we loved it." So, I mean, I'm really glad about that. I'm glad that that's the case, and that's exactly what I want to hear, and it's what I aim for. And because I've waffled I've now forgotten, of course I have, and partly because I'm 62, I have now forgotten what the question was, Tracy.
Don't worry, I was just saying, what was it that is so special about your tours that people want to leave them amazing feedback?
I think
you've answered it. Yeah. Can I also mention that I'm also your age, so I'm not massively younger. I'm pretending to be, but I'm not. Now, obviously, we do work with walks tours as well, who do small group tours, and we absolutely love walks tours too. Yours are slightly different in that your groups are larger. So just give us a little bit of a chat about kind of how many people are in your group and kind of the expectations a little bit actually as well about mobility, because I know that question will get asked. So kind of just sort of describe a little bit the logistics of your tour.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question, right? So, certain tours are longer than others. So the Changing the Guard one, you need a bit of mobility. There's not steps, but there is a bit of walking. And it's just unavoidable. It's where we start, it's where we end up. If you're going to see this well, as you can imagine, I post all those details on the walks themselves so that people can be clear about whether it's, and I say how long the walk is, in both time and of course distance, and whether there are any steps. There are no steps. There are no steps on the Changing the Guard tour. And, Soho, much shorter. I would say everyone can do Soho really. If you can walk half a mile or so, then you can definitely do Soho. And I would say that's true for most of them. I try to avoid the steps, but sometimes it's impossible. It's just, this is a medieval city essentially, and it doesn't always cater for, people with mobility issues. So you just got to factor that in. And, then we've got to factor in the rain. We've got to factor in, all those sorts of things too. London is a rainy city too. So, you must know in yourself whether you can do these tours. My walks will identify how far they are, and whether there are steps essentially. But I think, you've got to have, a general level of mobility to kind of get around. I think that's probably true of most walking tours, to be fair.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, and in terms of group size, well, it depends really. So for Changing the Guard, because it's quite a spacious area, generally speaking, you can do quite well with, larger groups. So 20 or so is fine. For normally around Soho, which is cramped, it's more like 10 to 15 is a workable number. And that's generally speaking what I take around. So that's the sort of numbers that it works, really. I mean, obviously people can do these tours privately. And of course, I'm more than happy if they want to do that. I think there's something quite lovely, though, being part of a group. Because it's kind of interesting, because when you're part of a group, you get some of the stories that come from the group. A lot of the things that I've learned on these tours come from the guests. And that's true, from guests from abroad or guests from London. So to give an example, not everyone will. I'm going to tell you an example that happened just yesterday on my walk. Not everyone will know this person, but nevertheless, on my walk yesterday, I had Mickey Most's daughter. Now, Mickey Most was a very famous record producer. He's the guy that produced the Animals. Oh gosh, help me out! I'm 60. House of the Rising Sun. So he produced that and lots of other things too. So I have his daughter on the tour, and I'm getting all these stories about Mickey Most, who's, he's pivotal, he's crucial to the rock and roll story in London and therefore, across the globe. Then if we go back a couple of months ago, again, they won't necessarily mean things to everyone, but there's a chap called Chaz Chandler. Chaz Chandler was the bassist on the Animals, coincidentally the same group, but he was also the manager of Jimi Hendrix. Wow. And so now I've got Chaz Chandler's niece on the tour. He's telling me all these stories about Jimi Hendrix, and people that would gone to the clubs and, just yesterday, I didn't get a chance to talk to her because this was on the Changing the Guard tour. So she's going to come onto my Soho tour, but she also worked with Dick James. Dick James was the guy that was doing the music, who owned the copyright to the Beatles songs.
So you never know who you can meet on a tour with you and hear all those stories. That's absolutely amazing.
So you get all this kind of insider stuff, and which is really, really lovely.
That's really cool. As I say, like, you don't know what
You don't.
information the people are coming with them as well, and
Absolutely.
what their interests are, and
Exactly.
what they. I mean, Doug's really good on medieval history. He knows loads of stuff about that, and I'm always like really surprised when he tells me something like, "Oh, okay." So you just don't know what you and who you're going to meet.
That's one of the benefits. To have a group rather than do a private group.
And you also meet people from all over the world as well, which is always really, really nice. Now, if somebody's going to book a tour, would you recommend they do it? Is there a time you'd say do it, like at the beginning of their time in London or later when they found their feet? Which way would you say
that's
do
a good
it?
question. I mean, it depends how far. If you've gone all the way from Australia, for instance, right, you need a bit of, that was a long flight. I need some moments to myself, so maybe that's a part of the factor. But I would say, let's just say that you have, I don't know, a 5-day tour of London. Let's just play that game. I think what you should do on day 1 is a walking tour. On day 2 is a walking tour. Day 3 is a walking tour. Day 4, I would say do a walking tour. And then just before your flight, I would suggest doing a walking tour because it's the best way to access London,
And then Heathrow.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Actually, Heathrow is a walking tour. But
Yes, it is.
All the way through. And then, of course, go visit our churches, visit our pubs, and have some good food, and see a show or two. That's the London experience, really.
I can't wait. I can't wait to be back in London. I just love being there. It really is one of those, like, if you're bored of London, you're bored of life. Isn't that the quote? Now, have you got any tips for choosing the right walk based on particular interests or even time of year? I mean, is there any
interest? I think just go with your interest, right? But I also wouldn't personally. I mean, absolutely go with your history. So I do a Churchill tour. I think he's a really fascinating character. That's one of my tours. I love that. We go into the shops that he would bought all his stuff from. We sit in Churchill's chair in a cigar shop. I mean, it's just a crazy, crazy tour. It's wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. So if you like Churchill, do a Churchill tour. If you like Changing the Guard, and by the way, you should like Changing the Guard because it's brilliant. Do Changing Guards. If you like rock and roll, do rock and roll. That kind of speaks for itself. If you're interested, in the incredible story of Jack the Ripper, and the lens it gives you on Victorian London, particularly in really, really desperate areas, that is Whitechapel, do that tour. But I would got another piece of advice. Right, my other piece of advice is do tours that are just not obviously interesting to you. Do those tours too. Because it's there you'll discover new stuff, If you wouldn't choose the Jack the Ripper tour, choose the Jack the Ripper tour almost, because you will see and stuff will come to the surface, and you'll open yourself to another corner of the world. So I think being curious is a great thing, but I think you've got to be open to all the corners that there are in the world, because there's lots and lots of corners. So put yourself on walks that you know nothing about, and to see what comes up.
I will link to your tours. So hopefully some of you guys listening out there will be checking out Robin's website. And also we have a 10% discount as well for UK travel planning listeners as well. So I will link to that and the code. I'll give you that in the show notes. So you need to go and check the show notes to get that code and the link to go and book with Robin. But I always end the podcast with the same question. Everybody gets the same question.
Okay.
What would be? Well, it's always nuanced to the actual theme of the podcast. It's not the exact same question. But what would be the one tip you'd give someone visiting London for the first time who wants to understand the city, not just tick off sites?
Yeah, you know what I'm going to say, right? I feel it's got, you know what I'm going to say. In fact, I could just now sort of stop talking just for literally 30 seconds and let the listeners who are listening to this podcast fill in the missing words, because they know exactly what those 30 seconds of missing words are going to be, right? However, just for the sake of making sure, because I think if we have 30 seconds of silence, people will think, well, what's happened to the podcast? So
where's it gone?
I'm going to literally say it. It's go on a walking tour. That's tip number 1. Tip number 2 is go on a walking tour. And my third takeaway tip is make sure that you do tips 1 and 2. That's tip number 3.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Robin, for bringing your enthusiasm and your humour and your knowledge and information about your amazing walk and tours in London to our listeners. It's been great to chat with you. I'm very much looking forward to meeting you in a couple of months' time in London. Hey, guys, if you book a tour with Robin, you don't know, you might not only get Robin, but you may get myself. And actually, I have just remembered, Robin, I was going to ask you, because you did allude to this earlier on. So we're going to, we ended the podcast, but I'm going to have to do this because I've forgotten. You mentioned about your son. So at the moment, it's just, you're a one-man band, but
I'm so essentially a one-man band. My son Judd has done a couple of walks for me. And now here's the interesting thing. So, when you get these I don't know, these kind of businesses and it says father and son, Launder, that's my surname, Launder and Son, right? You see it on the side of a business or something. So what actually happened is, my son has not followed me into this business. I have followed my son into this business. So my son is a qualified tour guide. He's been doing it for a number of years. He's very good. He's very knowledgeable. He's very funny. And it was originally, I think it was my suggestion. He might say that this isn't the case. There's the thing with history. You can kind of, it's like, you get two different witnesses, you get two different kind of accounts of this thing. But it was my son. I suggested to my son, I think you'd be a really good tour guide. And I realized that when I was suggesting it to my son, it was because I wanted to be a really good tour guide. So he ended up being a tour guide. I thought, you know what, I want to do that too. So then that's when I kind of broke into that or moved into that. And Judd is so good. He's so knowledgeable. He's funny. What's slightly irritating about my son is that he is funnier than me. That's the bit I don't like. But otherwise, I adore him, of course. But the fact that he's funnier than me is slightly annoying. And he's really good at it. And I think, he'll take more and more of these walks. So he does the Jack the Ripper already. He does a changing of the guard, not for me, but he will do at some point. And he's also going to create, because he's a tour guide for Arsenal, the football club. He's also going to do a tour of the Arsenal and the Highbury areas. And that'll be interesting. We'll bring that online at some point. I think that
will be popular. That definitely will appeal to the amount of people. We've just been doing a lot of consults with people visiting the UK in the next few months, and going to a football game is very popular. And Arsenal has come up a few times. So not my dog. He's like, what do you mean Arsenal? Any other football team other than Liverpool?
It does generate the response. It does.
Definitely. By the way, thanks for filling in the blanks on that, because I know you did mention that earlier on. So for a second time, I'm going to say thanks very much, Robin, for coming on the podcast. It's been brilliant chatting to you this week.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure. Thank you very much, Tracy, for the invite.
Thanks again to Robin from Fantastic Walks for coming on to this week's episode of the podcast to talk all about his walking tours. You can find the discount code and a link in the show notes for this episode at uktravelplanning.com/193 for 10% discount off Robin's tours. If you've enjoyed this week's episode, please leave us a review on your favourite podcast app. It really helps other people planning the trips to the UK to discover our podcast, and we will be eternally grateful. Thank you very much. But as always, that just leaves me to say until next week, happy UK travel planning. Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of the UK Travel Planning Podcast. As always, show notes can be found at uktravelplanning.com. If you've enjoyed the show, why not leave us feedback via text or a review on your favourite podcast app? We love to hear from you, and you never know, you may receive a shout out in a future episode. But as always, that just leaves me to say until next week, happy UK travel planning.